A weary traveler comes across a lone horse by the shore. The animal seems calm, tame even, slowly approaching the tired wanderer. By the look of his shoes, the creature is a blessing for the man. He has a long road ahead of him, and this might be the only way he'd make it. The steed does not mind his touch, patiently waiting for him to climb on its back. But just as he takes the riding position, the horse suddenly bolts off. The startled traveler attempts to bring the animal to a halt, or at least steer it, but to no avail. The pair gallop towards the sea at an alarming speed. Realizing he has no choice, the wanderer makes an effort to jump off the steed. His struggle has no effect. All his limbs are stuck to the horse, a devilishly strong force keeping him mounted. He screams in terror as they plunge into the salty water, diving into murky depths. The darkness beneath the waves clouds his sight, but he is finally freed from the clutches of the evil creature. The terrified man manages to remain conscious and strives to stroke himself towards the surface. Something tugs at his leg from underneath, releasing a red cloud. He looks down at the source, only to find a flurry of teeth, and then blackness. Yet another victim of a ravenous water spirit. Hi, I'm Cronkatris, here with a brand new folklore creature to dissect. Or rather, several, as dangerous water horses are more widespread than you might think. The primary focus of this video will be the Kelpie and the... Now bear with me, I'm taught by one of my books to pronounce this as Each Uisge. I'm not going to struggle with this throughout the video though. I'll just abbreviate the name as EU, like that abbreviation isn't taken. Anyway, there are a set of key differences between the Kelpie and the EU, but are otherwise so similar that I decided to combine them. First, let's discuss the one that is probably more widely known, the Kelpie, a water spirit of Celtic and Scottish tradition. It appears as a beautiful, sleek pony, either greyish-black or stark white, with a constantly wet mane. It usually wears a bridle, or even a saddle, tempting people to mount it. Be foolish enough to do so, and it will dive into the nearest body of water and slap its surface with its tail, imitating the sound of thunder. It will dive deeper and deeper, drowning the rider stuck to its back by magical powers. Some sources claim that it is content with only drowning its victim, but others state it also tears the body apart. In such cases, the Kelpie refuses to eat the entrails and throws them on the shore. It can often be found near freshwater rivers and streams, usually inhabiting running water, but presumably due to the confusion between it and the EU, some say it can be spotted beside lakes. One can discover whether a Kelpie lives nearby by its wailing and howling, signaling a coming storm. To make matters worse, a Kelpie is also a shapeshifter. It can appear either as a seductive young man or a rough and shaggy individual. Identifying a Kelpie in human disguise is not impossible though, as they are known to keep their hooves upon transformation, and their hair often contains a piece of seaweed entwined within. In his younger form, the Kelpie attempts to seduce young women, trying to persuade them to mount it in its equine shape. There are very few reports of Kelpies assuming a woman's likeness, being more content at luring men as their pony self. When it rarely dons the appearance of a scruffy older man, they jump behind riders, grabbing them, often scaring their victim to death. It is not impossible to tame a Kelpie, since they are generally only attempting to lure people on a ride, and are mostly acting neutrally. Such a feat can be achieved by gaining possession of its bridle, said to be the source of its power, after which the Kelpie will obey orders with the strength of 10 ordinary horses. However, a Kelpie could die as a result of losing his bridle if the story of James McGregor is anything to go by. He cut one off of a Kelpie and did not give it back to the creature, no matter how much it pleaded. telling him that it will die within a day without the equipment. Another account says that putting a human bridle and saddle on one also forces it to do one's bidding. A member of the Garaham clan did just that, using the spirit to drag stones and build a castle. Upon completion, he took them off, but the Kelpie was angry and exhausted. It ran into the river and cursed the people of the new castle with misfortune, which would last as long as it lived. Which, incidentally, also means that Kelpies can talk, even in their equine form. In the case of the EU, a similar horse-shaped water spirit from Irish and Scottish Gaelic folklore, many aspects are the same, but there are key differences. It is said to be far more vicious for one, tearing all of its victims to pieces, consuming all parts, except for the liver or occasionally the heart and lungs. It also hunts cattle and sheep, not just humans. However, some sources claim that it will not kill unless it catches sight of water, being quite tame in drier regions. It is also fonder of standing waters, found near lochs and the sea. The EU can also be tamed by saddling and bridling it, providing a steed that is stronger than an ordinary horse. Additionally, a cow's cap or shackles do the trick as well. However, according to some accounts, they are so vicious, presumably in the vicinity of water, that they may attack each other if either one has a strong human scent, courtesy of their previous victim. The EU possesses shape-shifting powers just like the Kelpie. It also generally appears as a seductive young man, but a giant bird is also a favored form, among several others. When one rides it, they get stuck all the same, but in the case of the spirit there are reports of people managing to escape. A very strong force, more than a human could exert, can get one unstuck, but cutting the limb off is also a viable option. Fighting one is not generally an option, as gunshots are said to be ineffective against the EU. However, loading silver into a gun, in the form of a coin for example, can actually harm and frighten it. This water horse appears most commonly during November, which period is sacred to the cats. There are quite a few notorious EUs, like the one near Knocknabeist on the Isle of Lewis, which has fortunately been slain, or a silky grey creature from Loch Traig. As recently as 1995, one has apparently been spotted on the Isle of Skye, possessing a parrot beak, which has led some to believe that the leatherback turtles are mistaken for the beast. Some chilling stories are also passed on, with occasional variations. Around Aberfeldy, an EU approached some children playing, 7 girls and a boy. The girls eagerly mounted the animal, but as the creature expanded to accommodate all of them, the boy realized something is not right. He hurried off with EU shouting, "Come back, you little scabiard!" Quite the accent on that horse. A bit slow on the draw, but the girls also noticed that there might be something off about their mount. But all they could do was scream, as they were already stuck. The EU rode off with them into a nearby lake, and had a right old feast. Not the livers though. In another tale from the island of Razay, a smith lost his daughter, presumably to the shape-shifting tricks of the local EU. As a revenge, he set up a forge by the lake, and with his son forged large hooks, keeping them red-hot in the fire, waiting for the monster. They lured it with a roasting sheep. The EU came with a mist, in the form of an ugly, shabby yearling. As it bit the sheep, the smith and his son leapt from hiding, puncturing the spirit with their hooks. Apparently, the dead EU dissolved into a puddle of slime, and left no bones or skin. Quite a wealth of information on these two, right? Well, this is just a fraction when it comes to similar creatures. For the sake of brevity, I will only briefly go over some similar creatures. The Shetland Islands are practically teeming with malevolent water horses. The Noogle has a green mane and a tail curling over its back. The Shupilti is a pony that keeps its ear when turning into a human, and the Tenchi is covered by seaweed. On the Isle of Man, the Cabyll-Uisge and the Gleshtin drag cattle, sheep and men beneath the water. The Irish Aughisky is one to be tamed but cannot glimpse the ocean. The Scottish Biast Na Srognig is the only known aquatic unicorn of the British Isles, but is ravenous for human meat all the same. Iceland also has a water horse called Haikur. Last but not least, in Dacia, which was more or less the predecessor of present-day Romania, the Endrop was set to lure people for a deadly ride. Quite the list. And surprisingly, these creatures are not exclusive to the British Isles, also appearing in Iceland and Romania. Obviously, there are a lot of magical and supernatural aspects when dealing with water spirits, but if we were to design a realistic animal that could actually exist with such features in an alternate universe, what would it look like? And what features do we have to abandon as misconceptions and exaggerations? Right out of the gate, we have a problem. All these mystical beasts are equine and predators at the same time. While many of them share shape-shifting abilities, since such a range of widely different appearances is not feasible, we must assume that they are indeed horses, or at least similar to horses. While it is not impossible for a herbivore to turn omnivorous or predatory, I would not go that route, as it would still be a stretch, and there is a far more feasible lineage we could borrow from. In prehistoric times, from the Eocene to the Miocene, entelodonts roamed Eurasia as well as North America. These beasts closely resembled pigs with huge heavy heads, cloven hooves, and beefy bodies. They were omnivores, but the extent to which they ate meat is unclear. However, based on their anatomy, markings found on their teeth, and other fossil evidence, it is clear that hunting was practiced by some species. Their entire family is now extinct, but we could theoretically change that for this hypothetical world. While entelodonts are not related to horses, they are hoofed, and slightly altering their stature and proportions could make them equine in appearance. With such looks, reports of the creature could certainly imply that it is in fact a pony or a foal. Some reports say beautiful, some say ugly. I'll let you decide that for yourselves. There is one little thing we have to change though. All these creatures live near water, often going for a swim. Small, pointy hooves would not be optimal for such a habitat, as they would sink into the mud or sand. Their feet need to be relatively large, with broad hooves, so they could more easily traverse their habitats. So we have the looks covered, and completing its food sources using lesser animals with a side of plant-based food like nuts, roots or fruits, we have the diet too. Their appearance on the British Isles and in Romania is not surprising, based on the spread of their ancestors. Concerning Iceland though, there are a few caveats. While it is not impossible for them to appear on the island, they probably had a hard time finding meat before the settlers arrived. They would most likely not be capable of hunting walruses due to their small size, so they would have to resort to feeding on birds and fish, which they are not really equipped to catch. While their build allows for high-speed chasing on most terrains, they cannot really follow birds into the air, nor are they particularly designed to swim after fish. Not to mention the difficulties that would come with the harsh winter of the country. I suppose there could be a species that adapted better to these island conditions, developing a hunting method focused on short bursts of extreme speed, paired with acrobatic jumps to reach birds mid-takeoff. Winter conditions could also be combated by storing various rations in dens and/or hibernation. Regardless, there are still a few notable points we have to tackle. There are some aspects of these folklore stories we have to take as misconceptions or exaggerations, like shapeshifting, appearing with bridles, talking, dissolving into slime, and being magically adhesive. However, we have to address the stories where they prey on their riders. Since humans are often quite vulnerable when venturing alone, Kelpies and the like developing a taste for their flesh is not unfeasible, but we have to assume that they are generally quite timid, and the few ferocious man-eating ones are exceptions. After all, quite a few of these were hunted, and not all stories involve them actively preying on humans. Additionally, waiting for people to jump on their backs is not exactly a sound battle plan. What we could say is that if a person would be bold enough to do so, of course the poor animal would bolt off to the nearest body of water, trying to get rid of its rider, who would then boast about how he survived the attack of a terrifying Kelpie. On the other hand, we could infer that riding the Kelpie is a saying, referring to someone being the victim of the horse-like predator. And about their tendency to drag their victims into the water, well, they are not apex predators, only opportunistic. For them to catch something as large as a human is probably very rare, dragging that wealth of food into the safety of the reeds or a seaside den where it would consume the body piece by piece. This would also coincide with reports of them tearing bodies to pieces, or leaving innards they do not want by the water, as their relatively small size would keep them from eating an entire human in one sitting. Moving on, we have to tackle their strength. There is no way they would be stronger than a horse. This exaggeration could originate from the fact that antelopes presumably had incredibly strong bites. Thus, a water horse biting down on a victim while dragging it into the lake could seem much stronger than it actually is. If the person survived, they probably had quite the experience, understandably overestimating the actual strength of the animal. Cases of tamed kelpies used for labor, in the event that they were true, would most likely be bragging without substance. That Garaham fellow probably let the Kelpie go after building the castle because he realized he would have had a much easier time with an actual horse. Speaking of which, domestication would be very unlikely to have huge success. Neither particularly strong nor fit for fattening, there really is no role such an animal could fill on a farm. What's more, it would most likely need to be fed meat, in addition to what, say, a pig would require. They would probably not be reliable guard dogs either, outclassed by, well, actual dogs. Overall, based on their lack of use for humans, aggressive tendencies, the stories told of their demise, as well as the fate similar animals suffered on the same group of islands, I'd say extermination efforts would have been undertaken were the water horses real. As to how effective these would be against these semi-aquatic solitary animals of which terrifying stories are told, I'm not certain. But humans generally do a pretty good job when it comes to mass murder. And that's pretty much it. We've created the realistic version of these water spirits. They would be halfway between a pony and a boar. The fact that you wouldn't want to ride them still holds true, I guess. Anyway, thanks for exploring these creatures with me, and if you have an idea for a future monster I should do the same with, you can tell me all about it in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video, well, there is a button for that. I don't really know what it does. Probably nobody does. And now I'm off to find a suitable creature that starts with an F. Oh boy, will it be a long search. Boy!